Good morning, everybody. My name is Simon Pascoe. I'm the coordinator of the Interreg 4A Patch project, which is led by the Port of Ostend. I'd like to welcome you here this morning for our first inaugural webinar that the Patch project has undertaken. EU Ports Policy and Challenges for the 21st Century. First of all, I'd like to welcome all of you for joining us this morning, and I'd especially like to extend a welcome to our speakers this morning. I'm joined this morning by Philippe De Backer, Member of European Parliament and Member of the Transport and Tourism Committee, and by Patrick Verhoeven, the Secretary General of the European Seaports Organisation. I hope you'll bear with us this morning. It's our first opportunity to work on a webinar together. So a few important sort of housekeeping points for you before we get going. As you can see in front of you, you have the agenda for this morning's meeting. So I'll be followed around 10:40 by Patrick, who will give an introduction to regulatory trends and challenges for Europe's seaports. Philip will then follow after Patrick with some EU perspectives from the European Parliament and looking ahead to the future ports policy. And that will be followed by the opportunity for you to hear some of the answers to your questions. So, without further ado, I'll go to the initial slides. And first of all, a few points for you to bear in mind as we go through. Just to remind you that on your participant screen, you will see in the bottom left-hand corner a Q&A button. That is the button via which you can ask questions of our panel today. You should be able to view the picture, the stream coming from Brussels, from the European Parliament, and you should be able to see on the right the slides that we'll work through. I've got some very helpful support here today from my colleague Simona Margarina in Düsseldorf, and by Daniela Arbin, Communications Officer for the European Seaports Organisation, who will be receiving and viewing some of your questions as they come in. So that's it for the sort of the housekeeping important points. What I would like to introduce you to now quickly, before passing over to our speakers this morning, is just a little bit about the Patch project. Patch has been a project which has been underway since 2009. Three-year project funded by Interreg 4A and the European Territorial Cooperation Objective. It's a project which is sought to increase the capacity, the adaptability and the diversification of our small and medium-sized ports. Our partnership brings together Portsmouth in the UK, Ramsgate in the southeast of England, and the Port of Newhaven in the UK. And on the European side, we've got the Port of Calais, who I know participants are with us here this morning, and indeed the ports of Zeebrugge, Zeeland Seaports in the Netherlands, and of course our lead partner, the Port of Ostend in Belgium. As you can see from some of the slides here, we have focused on significant cross-border working. This is a picture from our recent event in February, which took place on cross-border eco-innovation, encouraging small and medium-sized enterprise in the eco-innovation sector to share knowledge and work together to identify innovative solutions for our ports. It was a highly innovative event, and thanks to the support of the Port of Calais and indeed the Chamber of Commerce, we managed to host a 5-hour event between Calais and Dover aboard the new flagship, the Spirit of Britain, from P&O. There's a quick map of the location of our partners. And indeed, we've had some high-profile opportunities, both in events around the region, but also in Brussels. Here we are in 2011 with Commissioner Potočnik presenting the new innovative scheme that was launched, invested in the port of Portsmouth for resource-efficient and grey water, seawater heating and cooling systems for the new port terminal. Our lead partner, Wim Stuber, presenting the project, obviously, at on the Spirit of Britain back in February. And of course, today, a new innovative step for us is the launch of the e-learning platform. It's a platform which has been encouraged by partners, from partners, to maximize contact between the ports, particularly the small and medium-sized ports, which have not necessarily had the capacity to travel significantly, especially during the global economic crisis, which has placed enormous pressure and constraints on all of us. Here we have an interesting part of the project as well. An interesting dimension to our work was working on master planning. Significant investment went into studies and looking at the economic, environmental and social dimension of adapting and diversifying some of our ports. Significant work in this area particularly went on between the port of Newhaven, the port of Vlissingen and Terneuzen, and indeed the partners in Belgium as well. We had a high-profile event, concluding event, to close the project formally at SeaWorks 2012 in Southampton. SeaWorks was an excellent opportunity for our partners to meet business partners directly and learn about new innovations in the commercial world of benefit to the ports from both a diversification but also a logistical point of view. And here we have a picture of the president of the Chamber of Commerce for Côte d'Opale presenting the Calais Port 2015 project, a major master planning initiative for the future of Calais. Obviously, with the project, we've had a significant emphasis on European investment which is been indeed to optimize and better use port facilities for freight and cargo and ro-ro, but equally for the diversification and adaptation of our traditional small ports. Here we have some pictures from Ostend of the new heavy-duty quays which have been developed as part of the patch project. And indeed here in Zeebrugge, the extension of the CHZ terminal, which is looked to provide optimal quay space from the growing size of global vessels which are coming from the Far East. So the ports have been quite active. The cross-border element has been extremely important. The working relationships between our ports have been essential in learning and exchanging and reducing time waste to maximize the opportunities and move forwards quickly. Collaboration often is a strong aspect to the ports, to the patch project's work, and certainly our partners have appreciated some of the results which have been produced. We've also given significant focus to business aspects. Here you can see our stand, which was at SeaWorks this year, and indeed some of our business partners that joined us in making their own joint ventures and agreements for future products. Here we have a UK businessman working with a colleague from Flanders on innovative solar lighting. Again, more business-to-business aspects to what we've been about. And of course, the project has been ongoing during an incredibly busy time for many of our ports. The Belgian North Sea in particular is seeing a rapid expansion of its offshore renewable capacity. And of course, this is the first arrivals for the Belgian offshore wind farms arriving in Ostend earlier this year. Investments in Ramsgate have produced wave-breaking pontoons to optimise the capacity of the port of Ramsgate. Thanet District Council has been an active partner in the project and has been very keen to ensure that its Victorian port is adapted to cope with the new offshore wind farm vessels which have arrived to service the London Array and the Thanet offshore wind farms. Again, pictures of the wave-breaking pontoons being put into place. And of course, as you'll see from our archives in the portal, please feel free to view these after the webinar. Again, the project produced some interesting cross-border developments where the ports of Zeeland seaports, Terneuzen and Vlissingen, were able to share some innovative injection dredging techniques which hadn't previously been considered by the local authority in Thanet in Kent. So again, by working together, we've managed to produce economic savings as well as longer-term working partnerships. The pièce de la résistance in the project has been the terminal building and the contribution to the terminal building in Portsmouth. I know colleagues from Portsmouth are here today. We were very pleased with this project, a very high-profile project which received the highest level of environmental award for architecture and building. And amongst its innovative aspects are its use of grey water, seawater, and wind catchers to reduce need for air conditioning and reduce need for artificial heating and carbon emissions. The project has been active in many port networks and conferences around Europe, not just within the Interreg 4A region, but also here we can see the Green Port Congress in partnership with ESPO, where our colleague Howard Holt was recently speaking. Some of our workshops have been very well attended, most recent of which was the Blue Energy workshop that took place in Ramsgate. Extremely good workshop, and one which was well attended, and some very innovative new blue energy ideas for harbours and ports to reduce their energy consumption and their carbon footprint. Studies were undertaken by the project, and here in the Port of Calais, an example of some of the studies which looked at renewable technologies for the outer harbour. And indeed, one of the major investments from the project in Calais was in the innovative logistics, traffic management, and renewable capacity for the vehicle direction systems, vehicle management systems, which were installed there. A few more examples here. Solar lighting, which was trialled during the project and made significant impact and raised a lot of interest, particularly at Seaworks, with ports, not only in the United Kingdom, but also more widely around Europe. President of the Board of Trade, Vince Cable, UK Minister for Business and Trade, was the guest of honour to open the new Portsmouth terminal and saw at first hand some of the additional investments which Patch made there. If you consult the archives, you'll find there's a short video on this project. It's certainly something you should be welcome to look at afterwards. And finally, the innovative investments which have taken place in Zeeland seaports with the use of waste heat and energy for other providers and other producers in the port. So that's it from me for now. At this point, I will hand over to my colleague Patrick Verhoeven, Secretary General of the European Ports Organization, to run through some of the regulatory trends and challenges for Europe's seaports. Patrick, over to you.
Thank you.
Let arrows there.
Thank you, Simon. Good morning, all. It's a bit strange talking to an audience which you cannot see, but let's hope that this goes well this morning. What I want to do is briefly run through some of the issues that are on the European agenda today concerning ports. But before going into the detail of what we have on the agenda these days, I would like to start with a brief overview of where this all comes from. Why do we have ports on the European agenda? How did they come on the European agenda, and what happened in the recent past? I think that's quite important to have that background, also to understand why certain proposals of the European Commission will be discussed in this House, in the European Parliament, probably next year. So if I could start with that and take us a little bit to the early days of the European Union, or the European Community as it was called then. In those days, first, ideas on the ports policy already came about. Strangely enough, it was not the European Commission at the time who took those initiatives, but it was the European Parliament. A Parliament which in the early 1960s, of course, didn't have the same powers and capabilities and responsibilities as it did today, but nevertheless they took those first initiatives to come to a common policy for ports in Europe. Initiatives which didn't have much response. The Commission at the time was not really interested in doing anything on ports. It only started becoming interested under the presidency of this gentleman, Jacques Delors, who in the early 90s launched the first white paper on transport policy. Now, we've had a couple of white papers since then, and the last one was produced only last year. But that paper was quite significant because it set an important overall theme for Europe's transport policy, and that was sustainable mobility. And the whole idea of moving cargo, especially cargo, from congested roads to more environmental friendly modes of transport was born in that time. That is the time when the campaign, sorry, I'm going back, I should be going forward. The campaign Road to Sea was started, and the whole policy of short sea shipping became one of the driving forces of that transport policy. I don't know whether you can see it on your screen. It's a pretty small picture, but I think you may recognize the ship that is on that picture, or at least the shipping line to whom that ship belongs. Although the name has been taken off, I think it is a recognizable vessel. And there was also very strong lobby from those ship owners to bring this short sea policy on the European table. They also lobbied quite strongly at that time to bring the ports on the agenda, because if you want efficient shipping, you need efficient ports. And it was kind of a way forward of bringing a number of port-related topics on the European platform. If we move now fast forward to the almost present day and we look at what this transport policy looks today, well, I told you before, we have a new white paper on transport, but compared to the early 90s one, there is a significant difference. The idea of the modal shift is no longer, let's say, the overriding principle. We're looking much more now at co-modality, where every mode of transport has its own strengths, its own weaknesses, and should try to improve its sustainable profile. That means that also shipping is now in the picture not only as a solution, but partly also as a problem. That is part of the reason why ship emissions have become such an important topic today, which they weren't in the early 90s when the short sea shipping policy was brought forward. The Commission has outlined a vision for 2050 in its new transport policy, where, as you can see, there are a few highlights related to combining the increase of transport and mobility with the reduction of emissions, the development of infrastructure, and the international profile and competitiveness of the European transport sector. And these are some of the more concrete measures that we have, or that the Commission has outlined. And you'll notice that ports are mentioned there as part, or they're not exactly, well, they are mentioned as core seaports, elements of the trans-European networks, something I will say a few words on in a minute. But a strong focus overall on reduction of emissions, and especially carbon emissions of transport. But when we talk about ship emissions, of course, what has been very topical in the last months, and I think this affects most of the, or at least an important part of the partners in the patch project as well, is not carbon emissions, but sulfur emissions, where the European Commission produced a new directive proposal on sulfur emissions as a result of discussions that had started in IMO. The European Parliament reached an agreement in plenary this week, and we might, or we will expect that as from 2015, that in the SECA area, which covers the Baltic Sea, the English Channel, and the North Sea, there will be a sulfur limit of 0.1%, and in the rest of Europe, as from 2020, 0.5%. This will have a significant impact, and no doubt this is an issue where many people in the port and shipping industry are now looking as to how to implement these measures, what can be done, how can ports facilitate the process, for instance, by having scrubber technology, by looking at alternative fuels like LNG and so on. The deadline is moving forward very fast. 2015 is just round the corner, so to speak. So there's quite a lot of work to do there, and there also the European Commission is trying to help with a toolbox of measures, financing, amongst others, under the Trans-European networks, Marco Polo and other instruments. Carbon, as I mentioned, is the main topic in the Transport White Paper. We don't know quite yet what is coming for shipping in this field. There are, at the moment, all kinds of impact assessments being done by the Commission, but we do expect that there will be, either towards the end of this year or maybe early next year, proposals here as well to introduce market-based instruments for shipping, like we already have them for aviation. Whether it will go in the same route to an emission trading scheme, I don't know. Whether it will be a levy, all kinds of options are on the table. And in the Baltic area, there are also discussions going on now on nitrogen emissions. And some member states in the Baltic area are trying to propose to IMO a similar thing as the SECA for sulfur, but then for nitrogen emission control area. Whether that will come forward is not clear yet. I think we will know it probably towards December. We don't know whether North Sea member states will join in that. At the moment, they're more looking towards the Baltic to see what they're going to do. But I understand from contacts in the shipping industry that the impact of this will nowhere be as important as the sulfur emissions rules. Would in principle only apply to new builds, to new ships. So probably the impact of this will be less than the sulfur emissions. Quickly, a few words about 10T. I know Philippe will also speak about that, so I'll try to be very short on this. What happened with 10T is that we had a long discussion from the port sector as to how ports should be integrated in that infrastructure master plan of Europe, because I think that's how you can better refer to it. In the first attempts in the 90s, we actually lost an opportunity because we couldn't get into a discussion as to which ports should be of priority interest for these 10T, and as a result of that, the whole debate went a little bit past us, with the result that there was very few European support in terms of financial support for ports under the Trans-European networks. This has changed now. There is a proposal on the table now to establish a core network of about 84 or 85 seaports in Europe that would constitute the main nodal points in that Trans-European network core proposal. They connect to about 10 corridors, 10 Trans-European corridors. And there is, of course, also an important financial chapter to this, which Philippe will explain, I think, in his presentation, but where we should look at the possibilities, of course, for co-funding for ports. Now, the fact that there are 85 plus ports in a core network doesn't mean that the other ports are neglected. They are part of what is called a comprehensive network, a supporting layer, where there are about 300 ports registered or identified. They, just like the core network ports, will have to have adequate connections as well. Only the deadline is a bit further away there. But there will also remain financial support possibilities, not under the Connecting Europe facility, but overall under 10T, there will remain support possibilities. All this is going through a political process now. So these are proposals from the Commission that came about last year. Now we're going into the debate. Council already had its initial views, and the European Parliament is in the process of doing that right now. Just to make it a bit visual, this is what the core network looks like. It looks like the London Underground, but it isn't. It's the 10 corridors, trans-European corridors that pass through Europe. And I hope you can see it, that most of them either end or start or end or both in a seaport. But the money issue is, of course, the most important thing. If there is no budget to realize this fantastic plan, then, of course, all this will remain maybe largely a paper exercise. So that's why securing the budget that the Commission has proposed for the period 2014-2020, the 32 billion euro, is quite important. To end my introduction, I go to the heart of the matter, to the actual seaport policy itself. And there are a few pictures from the past. I told you in the introduction that this came on the agenda largely as a result of the short sea shipping policy. And the first real genuine policy paper that the Commission produced was in 1997, a green paper on ports. Some of you may still remember that document and the discussion that we had on that. It was initiated by this gentleman, Commissioner Neil Kinnock, who is, I think, to the UK viewers, certainly no unknown personality. The result of that was a legislative proposal, a proposal on market access to port services that was initiated by this lady, Loyola de Palacio, Spanish, who was then the Commissioner for Transport. Now, that proposal essentially dealt with the way port authorities give licenses or contracts or concessions to service providers in ports, whether that are terminal operators or pilots or towage or boatmen, doesn't matter. The aim was to make it more transparent, the whole process, to ensure that the rights of both parties were guaranteed, that you couldn't give contracts for eternity, that there was kind of pressure to give interested candidates a way to provide their services in ports. But there was also a very tiny article dealing with a concept called self-handling. Now, what is self-handling? Self-handling was about the right for port customers, for ship owners, to do certain services with their own personnel on board. And that triggered a very important reaction from labor and trade unions. And the picture to the right that you see on the screen illustrates that. It is in Rue de la Loi, not far away from here in Brussels, somewhere around 2002-2003. Was a strong opposition against that particular element of the directive, which in fact killed the whole thing. The proposal was rejected twice by the European Parliament, so there was a first process where in the end, with only about 20 votes difference, the directive was rejected. And a second proposal, well, didn't even make it to the finish. It was already voted down in the first reading. So that was the whole famous port package story. After that, there came, as we call it in Greek theater, catharsis, a kind of period of cooling off, letting everybody let the steam off. And this commissioner, Jacques Barrot, who was then responsible for transport, took his time for that. He organized a consultation that took about a year. And the result of that was a communication, which is still valid today, communication on ports policy from 2007. But that is a communication that doesn't propose any new legislation or any new rules. It is basically consolidating what the treaty says. It gives interpretation, it gives guidance, but it doesn't actually produce new rules or new legislation. Naturally, a lot of stakeholders were happy with that at the time, after the difficulties we've had with the legislative attempt. And this brings us in the present day with yet another transport commissioner, Sim Kallas, who said last year that, well, it's nice that we have that communication from 2007, but it's, almost 4 years, 5 years old now. Is it not time to review our policy for ports? Should we not look into this in a little bit more detail? And he started a review, which is still going on today, and I'll give you some of the highlights on that in just a minute. And we may expect by 2013, so early next year, the outcome of that process. Now, from our perspective, there are about 4 essential things that we need to look at. And I have them here on the slide. If we start with the first one, we go back a little bit to what was the essence of the Port Services Directive. We talk about concessions. Now, I know that this term, creates sometimes some confusion because it's not used in every country. It's some countries, the relation between port authorities and terminal operators are simply done through lease contracts. In other countries, it's public domain concessions. Some have licenses, authorizations, but let's use that common name, concessions. It's really about how can you allocate land to private operators as a landlord port authority in an equitable and fair way. Should you always tender is a question. What are your powers as a port authority? Can you really have the necessary discretion to allow certain operators that fit within your strategy and keep others out? And how long can you give contracts for, and can you prolong them? If the service provider is doing well and after 20 or 25 years he wants a renewal, should you do a tender again or can you prolong it? I think these are some of the essential questions that we're looking at. What is happening today on a different field is that the services of internal market in the Commission have produced a general directive on service concessions, which would cover ports, but not just ports, and a whole bunch of other industries as well. And the question is this really the right instrument for what we do? And then I'm specifically talking about the land concessions and the land lease. We've had a long discussion on that internally in our organization, but we've come to the conclusion that public domain concessions or land lease contracts really are not service concessions, because we are, as port authorities, not acquiring any service. We are giving the land to an operator so that that operator can provide a service to third parties. So our advice would be that probably it would be better to stay out of this horizontal directive, also because it is quite a heavy-handed instrument which would restrict in a great amount the discretion of port authorities. This is an all-time favorite, public funding and state aid. I remember that already in the 1970s this was being discussed, and especially ports in the United Kingdom were very keen on Europe to do something about this, because they felt that there was an unfair kind of regime on the continent where ports were being funded by states or cities, whereas on the UK they had to be self-financed. Well, this discussion has still not come to a close, and although there have been quite a few, announcements of guidance and clarity on this topic, we still don't have it. What doesn't make it easy is that this topic is no longer the responsibility of the Directorate General for Transport in the Commission, but for competition. And people in the competition authority are not so keen in making sectoral guidelines. They prefer to stay horizontal. So it's very doubtful whether we will see anything concrete coming towards us in the very near future. The third one is what we commonly name the technical nautical services, but essentially we're talking here, I think, mainly about pilotage, and the question to what extent public monopolies, public service monopolies that we encounter quite often in this sector, are they compatible with treaty rules, with competition rules? Can we qualify them as service of general economic interest? And if so, how can we still ensure
Backer.
Okay. Well, you must think I'm terribly rude that I've always been looking at the ceiling, but I assumed that the camera was up there, and actually it's right here in front of me. So apologies for not looking you straight in the eye all the time. But well, we were cut off there for a moment, but just on that labor issue, just to tell you what we do expect that will happen is that we will see the results of a study that the Commission has made on the different ways that labor is organized in European ports. It's quite an extensive study which looks at the legal aspects, but not just the legal aspects, also the practical issues. You know, how does it work in reality? How is labor organized? How do you get access to the profession? And what are the conditions that labor pools could impose in certain ports? But what the sequel will be of that, I think that is a bit premature to say at this stage. I think it will become all clearer towards the end of the year, and that brings me to my last slide, is just an overview of what will happen with this ports policy review. Simon already mentioned, or I think it is in your briefing as well, that the Commission did a great survey of the industry, a business survey on port services. That was closed end of August. And we will see the results, or hopefully we will know the results, at the end of this month when the Commission is organizing 25-26 September, a huge conference here in Brussels where they expect about 400 people to come, where the results of that study will be presented. Also the results of the labor study will be presented, and issues like concessions, like state aid, like pilotage will be discussed in different workshops. It's an open event. If you haven't registered yet, I would warmly encourage you to do so. There is a website. I now forget what the name, the reference is, but I think we can provide that. And you can still register for that and participate in those discussions. And then, of course, the crucial period is the period after that, October, November, when concrete proposals will be prepared. There is actually a limited window of opportunity. If the Commission wants to do anything that needs the approval of Parliament, it will have to come up with a proposal by Easter time, because we have elections in 2014, and that means that any proposals that, you know, would have a chance of getting through would need to be on the agenda by then. I think that's what I had, Simon. I hope I haven't been too long, and I look forward to the discussion and the questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Patrick. Very much appreciated for that input in terms of the forthcoming calendar of what's happening, the impact, of course, of the EU having a big effect on our ports and the way in which particularly services and tendering and investment are undertaken. These are certainly issues that we've been looking at in the Patch Partnership, and certainly we'd be very keen to be present at that conference in the next 10 days. We're also surrounded by a very big EU agenda, which is looking towards the future of the EU budget post-2014. This has major issues, not only for the, as Patrick has said, for the trans-European network and the investment in transport and infrastructure in the next few years, but certainly it has implications for the future of cohesion policy. Cohesion policy has an additional financial benefit for investment in transport infrastructure, and certainly one which we would, in the ports, be very keen to support. The Patch project, as I said, has done quite a lot of innovative work around master planning, and particularly the integration of ports within their wider communities in terms of how to develop sustainable infrastructure, and certainly using the best use of waste resources and indeed renewables that are present within our harbour communities. So without further ado, I would like to turn to our next speaker. I'm very pleased to welcome today Philippe De Backer. Very much appreciate Philippe's time today and the efforts obviously he's made to race back from Strasbourg to be with us here in Brussels today. It's been a very big week in the European agenda here in Brussels, with a major State of the Union speech being given by the President of the European Commission this week. Certainly Philippe has got a strong background in local and regional communities. I was elected a councillor in 2007, and in 2011 followed in the footsteps of VLD colleagues in Belgium into the European Parliament. Philippe is on a serving member of the Transport and Tourism Committee, and certainly is very keen, being from Belgium, looking at the logistical issues, the fact that Belgium is at the centre of the European transport network in this part of Europe, and looking at how this vein of economic development can be developed and encouraged in a sustainable way, which can reduce bottlenecks and allow the network to function smoothly. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the floor to Philippe. Philippe, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity I get here to speak today on port-related and logistics-related issues. It's always nice to talk about something else than State of the Union's bond issues or banking unions, something that is maybe a little bit more tangible, especially to the people who have tuned in today. I will just provide you with some overview and some background of things that are happening today in the Parliament. I will refer oftentimes to what Patrick has already said, try not to repeat what he has said, but give you a little bit more of a perspective about how the whole trajectory from logistics and port issues have come into also European politics and in the European Parliament. And I would like to start off just by mentioning that at the end of last year, the European Parliament has voted a white paper, a roadmap to a single European transport area. And there, of course, you see the big lines, the big principles coming in and being stated. There is, of course, the core aim to find sustainable solutions for all the increase in logistics and the amount of goods that are being transported today across Europe or internationally. And there, of course, making Europe also more competitive in that respect. And there, of course, we all know that ports play a crucial role in that. They also play a crucial role in another strong aim of the white paper, namely the emission reduction by 2050 of 60% of carbon footprint. And there also, I think, the ports have been implicated. Of course, the most important of all is this completion of the internal market for all transport modes. And as Patrick already mentioned, there's a shift away from the modal shift towards more co-modality solutions. And I think this is indeed the way to go forward, implicating all players within the logistic chain to see how we can come up with the most competitive and the best solution. So this principle of co-modality is really central also within the white paper. Now, following on this white paper, of course, the Commission is coming up with all kinds of new legislation and proposing and introducing this into the Parliament. Patrick already mentioned some, the TEN-T review, but also the airport package, the fourth railway package, which we are also expecting by the end of this year, beginning of next year, and of course the long-expected port policy, which was announced for the end of this year, but I think it will take a little bit more time than was foreseen. And as Patrick already mentioned, within the Commission there's this agreement not to introduce new legislation towards the end of next year, so we will see if they will be able to propose something indeed before Easter. Now, moving on from the white paper, of course, the two major files which are in the Parliament today already, which are Commission proposals, are on the one hand the TEN-T policy guidelines and of course the Connecting Europe facility, of which I am the shadow rapporteur for the Liberal group, so I'm closely linked to that file, and I will explain a little bit and give you some background on that also. First, maybe on the TEN-T, again, within this framework of making a more competitive and more unified internal market for transport modes, the TEN-T really play a crucial role. They try to remove bottlenecks, they propose to upgrade infrastructure and streamline also very important cross-border transport operations, where in the past nation states often invested in internal transport infrastructure, but often forgot that they were part of a more larger European network, and so we still see a lot of bottlenecks and a lot of missing links across borders. Of course, also, again, this co-modality issue here in the TEN-T is really front and center, in the sense that the proposal also tries to improve the connections between different modes of transport and at the same time also contribute to climate objectives. There's a real focus on European added value, which is, I think, very important. Again, we are all part of a wider network of logistics and transport, so sticking to national boundaries, I think in the 21st century doesn't make a lot of sense. So this really additional co-financing for cross-border issues, I think, is really important. Like Patrick already explained, you have a dual layer. You have the comprehensive network and the core network, and there you see, contrary to what happened in the past, that ports are really front and center also in the core networks. More than 80 ports have been incorporated into that, into the 10 proposed corridors. And this is really important, I think, to link them up with other modes of transport and really also let them play a major role in how we're going to deal with the increasing goods traffic of the next years. The TEN-T really serves as a key instrument to really have a coordination, a kind of a master plan for the implementation of this core network, but also the comprehensive network on which more than 300 ports are involved. And most member states will play also an important role in this, establishing a connection within these or between these maritime ports. So the TEN-T really makes sure that there's a better coordination, and the experience up to now of the different coordinators for the different corridors and the different programs is up to now, I think, quite positive. Maybe we need also in the Parliament still have a discussion on the clarification of the role of the coordinator, but I think there most people are thinking on amongst the same line. Maybe just an update for the Parliament. As you know, maybe there's always one person who is appointed a rapporteur, who is holding the pen for the Parliament, and around him, around the rapporteur, there are shadow rapporteurs of all different groups. Now today, the situation is as follows, that the rapporteur has published its draft report, so we know how he thinks and how he feels, and now we are entering the phase of discussion also within the Transport Committee within the European Parliament to propose amendments and to also make sure that the TEN-T is going in the right direction. I strongly have the feeling that within the Trans Committee and within the European Parliament, this European perspective, European thinking is really present across all groups. So I think on the TEN-T policy guidelines, you will see not that heavy a change on the Commission proposal. This is quite different for the financing of the TEN-T guidelines, the Connecting Europe facility, which is a new instrument created for financing of not only transport, but also energy and ICT infrastructure across Europe. And this is really something that is really important. It's a new proposal from the Commission. For transport, there's around 30 billion euros that is foreseen, and that's not nearly enough for the estimated 500 billion euros that would be needed to really to fully integrate transport infrastructure within the European Union. But it's a start. It's more than was foreseen last time. But again, here you see that within the overall discussions of the multi-annual financial framework, which is proposed today and which is under negotiation between the member states and the Commission, and basically discusses how much money the European Union will have over the next couple of years, you see that there's a lot of pressure on this Connecting Europe facility to downsize. And I think this is not a good evolution. I think the money is well spent and is also clear that it needs to be spent on transport infrastructure. There's also some new proposals from the Commission within the Connecting Europe facility, some innovative financial instruments which also create a leverage effect. So it's not just the downsizing of the budget as such, but also the leverage effect of those financial instruments will become smaller. So we're not talking about just the €1 at the end of the road. We're talking about the 5 or the 10 euro that might be invested, which might be lost if the budget is being cut. The major discussion there today is really focused on the 10 billion ring fencing from cohesion funds. It was foreseen in the Commission proposal, where 10 billion out of the cohesion funds moved into the Connecting Europe facility to be invested in cohesion countries, but with a clear transport objective. Here, the cohesion countries did not agree. They would like to keep the money for themselves, but then you see again that they would spend them on internal national projects and not invest, for example, in cross-border initiatives. So putting the money on the Connecting Europe facility to be used within the TEN-T guidelines, I think, is a sensible solution. A lot of MEPs agree, but of course, MEPs coming from cohesion countries have more difficulty with this. This will be really a large battle also within the European Parliament, and also between Commission, Parliament and Council. So for the moment, the discussions are not going in the right direction, but we will give some pushback in the coming weeks and also hopefully come up with a proposal from the European Parliament giving broad support to this Connecting Europe facility and the funding that it needs and requires in order to really implement the unified internal market within the European Union. And then maybe also lastly, a few words on ports policy. Unfortunately, I cannot say a lot more than Patrick has already explained. The consultations are ongoing. We have a lot of contacts with people within the field, within the Commission. The Commission itself is also sending out a lot of question lists and questionnaires to all of you, as I understood. So there we are in full preparation, or the Commission is in full preparation of new port proposal. As Patrick also mentioned, in the past, the proposals have not been very successful in the European Parliament. They never got through the Parliament. And I hope we can do it differently this time, because I really believe that also on ports policies, some new ideas and some steps forwards need to be taken. And of course, the discussions also that we have informally today with the Commission are also around the 4 or 5 topics that Patrick already mentioned. The concessions. Today there's a horizontal proposal in the European Parliament where the Internal Market Committee in the European Parliament is the lead committee. The Transport Committee just, I think a couple of days ago, also issued an opinion by the rapporteur, so it's still not adopted, in which she has proposed to reject the whole proposal of the Commission, which I think is not very realistic. So we will see how we can amend this and how we can push also this directive of horizontal concessions into a more sensible direction. Big question, of course, there remains, as Patrick also already explained, will the European Commission come with a specific approach for ports concessions, or will they also follow under this horizontal directive, which is indeed today, as it stands, a quite heavy directive. A second issue is the port financing and state aid. I think there's a broad consensus that transparency is needed and is really at the core of the discussion. The case-by-case approach, which is followed today, where member states and European money are not always used in the best way. Also, European money, which has been spent on, or was supposed to be spent on port money, for example, through cohesion policy, has not been always spent in the best way, as we can see in a report published a couple of weeks ago by the Court of Auditors, the European Court of Auditors, where we could clearly see that some of that money was not used as it was intended. So transparency on port financing and state aid is really, really key. I think also this is something that's broadly shared within the Transport Committee of the European Parliament. But as Patrick explained, there is a discussion going on between the DG Move and the DG Competition, where the DG Competition is more pushing for horizontal, while the DG Move really sees the specificity of ports and really wants to develop something specific. And up to now, I still don't know what the Commission intentions are, but I hope they will come up with a proposal which at least allows the ports to function in a normal and transparent way. Technical nautical services, I don't have a lot to add to what Patrick already said. And then, of course, the last issue also in this port package, or this newly proposed port package, should be port labor. It's a very difficult and for a lot of people an emotional theme. I think oftentimes there's also no really rational approach of how some of the trade unions are approaching this. It's more of a symbol for them than anything else. And I think we should really look at what's going on in the ground, on what's happening in labor pools, what's happening to access to the profession, and also how on land of the ports, this ports labor is filled in. I know, for example, in Belgium, although they all fall under the same legislation, there are some interpretational differences between the different ports, which create opportunities for some of them, but less opportunities for others. So this is really something that should be looked at and should also be followed up. I'm a liberal, so I think it's very clear that I have some issues with how port labor is organized today, and I would like to see the Commission also taking steps forward in opening up the port labor. But this again will be a very heated debate also within the European Parliament, and I'm not sure on this issue we will end on another bank of the river, as I might say, than last time. So these are some of the issues which are at play today within the European Parliament, and I'm looking forward to having a further discussion with you on some of other issues or some of clarifying questions on the same issues.
Philip, thank you very much for that introduction. We're looking at some of your questions that are flowing in at the moment. If you haven't asked a question, and I just appreciate the question that was been raised by our colleagues down in Portsmouth, we'll be looking to address that one in a second. But if those of you who haven't asked any questions yet, please feel free to do so. We can take questions at any time, and obviously try to ask any one of our panel before our allotted time is up here. Just to keep things moving, obviously, and to start off, My question to Philippe is a more general question, political question, about the function of the European Parliament under the new decision-making processes which the Lisbon Treaty has brought into being. Understand that the Parliament has shared decision-making or co-decision with the Council of Ministers now. And for many of our ports, it may be interesting just to have a quick overview from Philippe as to how the Parliament's powers of negotiation have increased with the arrival of the Lisbon Treaty. This could affect policy, finance, and some of the big decisions which we will face that Philippe has just described. Philippe, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Of course, with the coming into force of the Lisbon Treaty, the European Parliament has really extended its lawmaking powers. It is now up to a par with the US Congress, and I think it's one of the two most powerful parliaments within the world. And there's really a vast majority of EU legislation which is now falling under co-decision. There were, I think, over 40 new fields where the procedure for co-decision by the Parliament and the Council of Ministers has come into force. This includes agriculture, this includes the budget, this includes energy policy, immigration, justice, home affairs. Transport was already also on the European level, so fundamentally not a lot of things have changed in that respect. But I think with the discussion that and the points that were raised also earlier on, for example, the budget, where we have a discussion today on the Connecting Europe facility and the funding of that, the Parliament has full co-decision powers. And you see today that still under this new Lisbon Treaty also the member states have to adapt, and they have to make sure that they respect the co-decision powers of the European Parliament. And this is not always the case. We can see, for example, in the budget that some more principled discussions or decisions are being taken, which also affect the future discussions on, for example, Connecting Europe facility. So it's very clear that we also sometimes have to push to get our rights as a parliament, but I think this is happening today. So the role of the parliament has really become much more extensive, has become much more important, and on a lot of issues we are now really taking co-decisions with the council. And this, I think also from your side, is not an unimportant issue in the sense that where in the past maybe more focus was on the commission or on council members, today I think also the Parliament plays a very important and a full-fledged role in this decision-making process.
Thank you, Philippe. Patrick, an initial question to warm up for you. Diversification of traditional ports, small and medium-sized ports, is a major challenge. Innovative investment in our ports requires a strong vision. Certainly requires a strong link between different policies at local level, territorial level, between the port and its community and its hinterland. Do you think at the European level there's a strong enough link between ports policies and the other key sectors that are referred to under the EU 2020 package at the moment?
Well, the whole idea, of course, as I explained on the transport policy, is to bring the different modes together. So in that sense, there is a high priority in connecting the nodal points in the chain, which seaports are, I think, one of the most important ones, to connect them with the different modes of transport. And that is not only the guiding principle in the infrastructure policy, but also in the ports policy. And related to that is the whole discussion also of facilitation of procedures, administrative procedures, bureaucratic procedures that can be streamlined in ports. So I think that is the overall guiding principle, certainly within the transport policy. Where we may look for further improvement, I think, is in the integration between the different policies as such. You have transport policy, but you also have, for instance, environmental policy. Where we've already made a few steps. I mean, the Commission has produced early last year guidelines on how to work, for instance, in Natura 2000 areas, how ports can develop and extend and grow within nature protection areas. But still there are, a number of fundamental issues that could perhaps also be dealt with at political level. And one of the proposals that we are making now towards the European Parliament in the discussion on the trans-European networks is to ensure that if a project, whether it's a port project or any other transport project, has been given the status of, being significant in TEN-T terms, that it also has that status under environmental protection laws, that it can have benefit in a certain extent from the overriding public interest, as it is called in environmental legislation, so that we can avoid, very lengthy delays in developing the infrastructure that is needed. We're not arguing you should do away with the environmental legislation. We're only arguing that you should make it more efficient in the planning process, and that is something definitely where Europe can make a difference.
We've had our first question in from Jerry in Portsmouth. We want to get this question in fairly quickly because I understand Jerry is having to escape to the call of a ship, as he's one of Portsmouth's main pilots. Jerry's asking the question about the sulfur control area, and I know your colleagues came to Zeebrugge recently and spoke about the emerging sulfur control area proposals. They've certainly come up the agenda very rapidly, and I think whilst shipping routes in the Channel and North Sea area that we are aware of are conscious that it will have an equal impact on all shipping companies. I know the European Commission has done some studies on this in terms of the impact assessments related to these particular proposals. Ports like Portsmouth are concerned by their distance because obviously, to put it simply, Portsmouth's 5 times as far away from France as some of its nearer competitors. So certainly the question I'm receiving here is, do you see there's any potential within the future TEN-T that might be able to reduce any negative consequences in terms of modal shift that would occur artificially as a result of bringing what is otherwise a laudable environmental aim?
Well, yes, there is already under the present TEN-T policy. So there have been under the most recent calls for proposals. The Commission has already indicated that they're keen to support any measures that can facilitate both the port and the shipping industry in meeting these new rules. Now, it's called a toolbox. There are some budget made available, and some ports indeed, and even some port associations, like for instance in the Baltic, have already come up with proposals for that. There's a strong focus now on the use of alternatives like LNG and so on. But whether there are at the moment sufficient support measures at hand to deal with the actual modal backshift risk, I'm not sure. And I think that is something that the Commission will need to look into a bit more stronger, because they may have not, although they have recognized that there may be a problem in that sense, I don't think they have really come completely to grips with it in the proposals that they are making in terms of support measures. That's at least also what I hear from the shipping industry, that they think that the toolbox that is presented is of course positive, but not really enough to deal with the potential risk that is there in the English Channel, in the North Sea and in the Baltic Sea.
Okay. Philip, would you like to comment?
Yeah, maybe very briefly. I pretty much agree with what Patrick said in the sense that we have voted last week the whole sulfur story, and you see there that although initially the Parliament went a lot further than the initial proposals, I think the compromise that was reached now, I think the different partners around the table can live with. And then the question, of course, comes: does the Commission, within its different modes of finance, foresees enough financing to make this transition and to co-invest or to help shippers to invest in changing to LNG or installing scrubbers or things like that? And this remains to be seen. This is still an open question. I think with the new proposal that is on the table, this is taken into account. But there's always a question of is it sufficient? And if it's not, where does additional financing will come from? Of course, with a very limited European budget, I might add. Most people are not aware of this, but the European budget as such is not large. It's only 1% of European GDP, while in most member states it's 40-50% of GDP. So they're also only looking towards the European Union or the European budget to solve these problems, I think is also not realistic.
Certainly from our experience in the Patch project, cohesion policy and European territorial cooperation has been essential for allowing ports the capacity, the additional capacity to work together. Obviously, there's a strong emphasis on competition in the Channel and North Sea area, but equally collaboration is important, particularly on the longer-term agenda. The point we would make in relation to European funding and the multi-annual framework package that is on the table at the moment is that it is essential. It's certainly essential in terms of leverage, certainly essential in terms of being able to work together. I think it's one of our partners was making the point at our closing meeting recently in Ramsgate that the opportunity for ports to work together in a structured dialogue, in a structured network with longer-term projects is essential, and certainly something which we as project partners and ports would support in the longer term. Philippe, do you actually have any more detail that you could elaborate on in terms of the unfolding timescale in the Parliament for consideration of the Commission's proposals for budget in 2013?
But the overall budget discussion is ongoing, and it's not an easy discussion. The discussion there on the multi-annual financial framework, discussing the budget for the European Union starting 2014, will be a very difficult one, because you see that on the one hand there was a group of member states and a group of also people within the European Parliament and within the Commission who are really trying to move also the budget, I would say, into the 21st century. The budget, of course, carries a lot of historical weight, where the main focus was on agricultural policy, was on cohesion policy. And I think it's time now to make the shift towards really an investment budget, more emphasis on innovation, research and development, but also transport there. And like I discussed already in my opening remarks, the Connecting Europe facility there is really crucial to make sure that adequate funding is foreseen for connecting the internal market for transport. And it is an easy target. I mean, the lobbies for agricultural policy, the lobbies for cohesion policies are much stronger and better organized than any of us can really imagine. So I'm really afraid that if we continue along these lines, the Connecting Europe facility will be the budget which will be cut first. It will be made an example of saying, look, this is something new, this is something additional, we don't want it, we want to stick to what we have and to what we know. And this is actually also the reasoning of a lot of the cohesion countries saying, look, why do you want to do this into this new complex infrastructure like the Connecting Europe facility? We know how we can handle cohesion money, we know how to spend this cohesion money, so just give us this money on the cohesion policy. And I really don't agree anymore that this is the best way to continue spending money. So we, as an ALDE group, and I think we also have a lot of support within the Parliament with other groups, will really fight for this Connecting Europe facility to make sure that transport and infrastructure investments are really going through over the next couple of years.
Patrick, just a question for you related to that. When we've got a number of ports here listening to us today, would you, which particular pressurized campaigns might you invite or encourage individual ports to join you on in terms of some of the things you've talked about already in your presentation to do with the transport funding, but equally to do with parts of cohesion policy as well, which does have a benefit in the ports?
Yeah, I think to stay on the funding issue, I think the real support or the real lobby that is needed is at national level. I mean, it's convincing member states, of course, that this budget, 32 billion, Philippe referred to the total amount that is necessary, which is 500 billion. 32 billion is a small contribution, a vital contribution, and I think it's important that member states realize that, you know, for the greater good of the country and the infrastructure, that it's necessary that remains. So the lobby, and that is what we've also asked our members, and I think is also my call towards the ports that are listening today, is to really knock on the door of whether it's Whitehall or whatever, or the Hague or whichever country you're at, or Paris, to convince the national governments. And we know it will be a tough discussion, especially those countries that are so-called net contributors to the budget are not very keen on having this 32 billion. And as you said, those that can benefit from cohesion don't want to have the 10 billion earmarked under 10T. But look what happens if we don't do it. And Philippe referred to that Court of Auditors study. I mean, that is a shining example of what you shouldn't be doing. The money, there's no policy. It's been spent on different projects that you don't know whether they will actually benefit the transport infrastructure or the transport networks in that country. They might be for some local reason. So I think, in my view, it's a lot better to maybe not just 10 billion, but to earmark a little bit more money of regional structural cohesion fund under a transport vision policy, so that we can avoid things that we've seen in those cases that came up in the report, where a quay wall is there that never has seen a ship, and other examples. So, but essentially, we need to convince member states, and we tried from our side with the transport lobby as such, together with railways, aviation, to do campaigns. But all that will only work if those campaigns repeat themselves on national level, and I think that is my main call towards the audience, if I may put it like that, is to really, and team up with others, team up with ship owners, with rail, with all the other stakeholders.
Yeah, often one of the challenges that our ports in the Patch project have faced is dealing with the here and now, and certainly in dealing with the projects. That even the Patch project itself has been it's been quite heavy to run and administrate, and certainly any discussions around simplification in the future of these programs, better interconnectivity between transport issues, maritime transport issues, and the wider community. Very much aware in the regulations for the new cohesion policy that we're talking about integrated territorial initiatives. Now, this is predominantly an initiative, a mechanism which is being discussed for urban areas and for in the urban dimension of the urban policy, and I know the European Parliament's Urban Intergroup is following these developments with interest. Equally, I'd make the strong point that where ports play a very important and vibrant role in their coastal communities, that this too should be allowed to be considered as part of a potential integrated territorial initiative in future. So whilst I certainly support Connected Europe and making sure that ports are that essential lifeline between member states across the border, certainly cohesion policy, when it does play a role in those communities, needs to involve port authorities and port strategies, master planning strategies in the building of new operational programs. There's a whole series of preconditions that are being attached to the future of cohesion policy. And I think this integrated territorial initiative is one which we would like to see ports playing an active role in making sure that where the industrial and commercial heart of coastal communities lies there, that is allowed to flourish. Indeed, next week we will be dealing with another topic. We'll be dealing with the topic of blue growth. And blue growth is part of DG Mare's work in recent weeks. And certainly we see the blue growth strategy as an important bridge between some of these sectoral policies to make sure that common sense and rationale and simplification can reign within individual territories. I know many of our partners in the Patch project have worked extremely hard at convincing both national interests, national politicians, and national organisations which are present in their territories. And certainly the leverage effect of European funding more generally is fundamental to allowing these developments to be planned over the longer term. Just moving on just to a couple more questions, if I could. We certainly we've been very keen on the whole element of energy efficiency, sustainability, and environmental issues being a growing importance to ports. Obviously, managing the energy bill of a major port or even a small and medium-sized port is a fundamental objective. And I think it's whatever the EU can do to embrace these new technologies is something which we would support. We've had some very small-scale trials looking at tidal energy, looking at solar energy, looking at heat from seawater exchange, etc., and even waste to heat exchange between major port stakeholders, so industrial sectors where a pharmaceutical sector may be using waste energy from some other port-side industrial interest. So I'd be very interested in any comments you've got to make, Philippe, around the whole energy efficiency and renewables agenda as it applies to us in the maritime transport sector.
Yes, it's of course a very important topic, and it's also put front and center within the white paper on transport. Although I must say that the attention towards sustainability and the greening of the economy has slipped a little bit with the financial crisis. You see this very clearly that, of course, member states and also at the European level, the priority now goes in putting out the fire and rebuilding the house instead of really the policies which have been set forward a couple of years ago. That being said, there's still a lot of investment going on. I must say that as a liberal, but also from a policy perspective, I never feel it's a good idea that a government or policy or governing body is imposing certain new technologies. I think it's much more important to create a framework which is allowing access of new technologies into the market, but then it's up to the market players, of course, to take up these new technologies and to work with it and to provide also insights on how these might be combined or how this might be playing a role in different areas of the market. Just to give you one brief example and sidestepping, we have seen this with the biofuels story, where there was a large push also from the European Union, a lot of member states to start investing in biofuels, and today we see also the downside of this. So I'm never very favorable to really, as a governing body or a government, stepping in and saying this is the technology we're going to use for the next 10 years. I do favor, and we already had a discussion in the context of the sulfur discussion, in the sense that, of course, once you are imposing new rules and setting a new framework where the industry has to adapt to, then, of course, as a government, I think you have every right and maybe even the obligation to also aid those industries to make the evolution towards these new guidelines or these new rules. And therefore, I support and I'm also looking into what the European Union can do in that respect. So I think it's still a major topic. It's still a horizontal topic touching a lot of different domains. You especially also see it still in the transport legislation. But as new technologies go, really imposing as a government something, I don't think that's a good idea. I favor creating frameworks and then helping industries evolve and move into new legislation.
Patrick, one other question which has been of interest to the Patch project in recent years, during the recent exchanges, has been the whole area of public-private partnership. We've actually played quite an interesting role in following the European Investment Bank. The European Investment Bank's activities are certainly being reformed and are evolving in terms of how they are providing state guarantees and providing guaranteed lending to major infrastructure projects, whether it be transport projects or renewable energy projects. And I think we'd be certainly interested in any comments from the panel about the future role of the European Investment Bank within this sector, and certainly within some of the new mechanisms they may be thinking about after 2014. Would either of you like to comment?
Very briefly, I'm not really an expert on how the EIB works, but I know that they're quite keen on working with ports, because we had them for 2 years in a row. They've more or less invited themselves to come and speak at our conference. We hold every year an annual conference in somewhere in Europe, where usually we attract around 200 to 300 people from the port industry. And the last 2 years, they've been very keen themselves to present what they can do for the port sector. So I think that's certainly very positive that we have them involved. I think the same thing applies, of course, to what we have been discussing before on European money and allocation of European money, is that you need, first of all, that transparency, and you need, of course, a good project, and you need to demonstrate, I think, also the added value and European added value of projects. I think the same kind of principles apply here. But overall, I think it's, of course, very welcome.
Yeah, I can briefly add to that. I think the role of the European Investment Bank will really start to increase for several reasons. We have proposed as from the European Parliament to increase the capital of the European Investment Bank in order for them to make it possible to do more investments. Secondly, they will play a large role in the new innovative financial instruments which have now been proposed under the Connecting Europe facility, and the pilot project is already underway in the project bonds. So here also they can play a very important role, and the reason that they will have a bigger role than today is quite simple. With a lot of restrictions today on capital markets, new regulation on banks and financial institutions, it becomes more and more difficult for those institutions which in the past were responsible for long-term lending to do that long-term lending and to really invest into long-term projects. I'm talking about 25, 30, 35 years. And so this is no longer possible for normal banks and normal financial institutions due to the regulation. So we have to find ways around that in order to make sure that those projects which have a longer period of running, 25, 30 years, still receive the appropriate financing, and therefore the role of the EIB will become much stronger in the future.
Just before one of my colleagues signs off, we're getting towards the end of our allotted time here. Very heartfelt thanks come out from the Port of Portsmouth here again for thanking the European Parliament and particularly the Commission for its support through its programmes and initiatives. Portsmouth, as you saw from the pictures that I showed earlier on, have enjoyed significant support from both the EU programmes and indeed from a European perspective by being able to work with European partners through the collaboration project. My colleague reminds me here as a Brit that he's daily reminded of the UK attitude to the European Union and its papers and comments, with obviously the exception that he's recognising that the EU, in particular, through the initiatives, the relationships and the investment, has done a significant amount for the Port of Portsmouth, and something which hasn't gone unnoticed locally in that community. So thanks there from Portsmouth, and I think Jerry on that is signing off to go and do his pilotage. For me, I think that's it. Patrick, are there any other particular points you would like to sort of conclude with from your side?
No, I think this was, first of all, a very useful first time for me to participate in a webinar. Of course, I've been participating in Patch before. I was at the opening conference. I think it's a good way of connecting, as you say, ports in a certain region. And I hope it will help also to bring, some of the European issues on the working level ground, let's say, because of course, sometimes we're talking about very grand schemes like TEN-T, ports policy and so on, but they have quite, direct implications on the field. I think that's what we're all about. That's what we try to do in ESPO through our organization. That's what you try to do in Patch, and I think that collaboration certainly is quite useful. And we are at a very interesting time. I mean, the ports infrastructure, the TEN-T is now going through a political process. Early next year, we'll see the ports policy coming forward, emissions. So this is quite an interesting time for ports and Europe. So thank you for having me here.
No problem. Philippe?
Yes, also from my side, of course, a big thank you. I hope it was as interesting for the people who are listening or viewing in. I think it's really important, as Patrick already briefly mentioned beforehand, to look for broad support on transport and infrastructure investments. Of course, today we're talking about ports, but we all know that ports cannot exist without hinterland connections. So this principle of co-modality, putting as a transport sector as such, a number of topics on the agenda, the European agenda, I think is really, really important. There are some strong lobbying forces here within the European Parliament, but also within the European Commission. So standing together, I think, can only benefit everybody who is part of these initiatives. And the only thing I would like to say is that I'm always open for follow-up questions. If there are any issues that we couldn't touch upon today or any clarification that is needed on some of the answers that we provided, I think Patrick and myself will be more than happy to do some follow-up questions through mail or telephone. So thank you very much.
Just to conclude, I can confirm that all the presentations from today will be included on the Patch website. The link will be present on the portal within the next few hours. You'll be able to get to the website, which is www.portofostend.be/patch. That will take you to the website, and we will place a number of these presentations there for you. Certainly, today we've learned a significant amount about the Future Ports Policy Review. We will endeavour to encourage representation at the Unlocking Potential Growth in Ports, the European Commission's major headline conference in the next 10 days, to find out more about the survey and about the results of the survey that the Commission has carried out across those key themes of port reform, port policy reform. The Connecting Europe and TEN-T proposals will be of strong interest to us as well. Point has been registered from Patrick about the importance of the national dimension, lobbying national ministries and departments of transport. But of course, when it comes to the cohesion budget and even the multi-financing framework, it's obviously a Ministry of Finance and Treasury issue, which can often be the key point and the key area with which to focus on within member states. Certainly interested to come back to the issue of project bonds, something we'll come back to in our webinar on the 28th of September, which we are doing from Luxembourg with the European Investment Bank. And just before we do sign off, just a couple more slides to show you in terms of the next seminars. So if you would like to join us again next week to hear more about the EU Blue Growth Strategy and, of course, implications with EU cohesion policy after 2014, we will be coming to you live direct from DG Regio and DG Mare to talk to you about those particular issues. That will be followed, as I suggested before, on the 28th, Friday the 28th of September. Again, same timings, 10:30 European time, 9:30 for our UK friends, with a webinar on the future of EU financing and investment for small and medium-sized ports. We've actually undertaken a very significant study on this particular issue in the Patch project, looking at examples from around Europe, and our expert will be there, as well as colleagues from the EIB, to share with you the findings of that survey and indeed seeing how the EIB might react. So that's it from us today. We're at 12 o'clock. We're over our allotted time. If we haven't answered any of your questions, please remember to register them on the website, and we'll make our best efforts to come back to you with follow-up questions from either of our panelists today. So thank you very much for your attention.